The desert burned under the twin suns, and the air shimmered with heat that seemed to bend reality itself. Nothing moved across the endless dunes except a lone human walking with a slow, heavy step. His water pouch was nearly empty, and every drop inside felt like gold. His name was Daniel, a soldier who had been left behind after the last skirmish of a war that was never his to fight. Dust clung to his face, sweat burned in his eyes, and his legs shook under the weight of exhaustion. Still, he walked forward because he refused to die lying in the sand. He had learned one thing about himself during the war. Humans were stubborn beyond reason. Far ahead, he saw movement. At first, Daniel thought it was a trick of the heat. But as he narrowed his eyes, he noticed shapes crawling across the sand. His hand instinctively went to his rifle, though the weapon had no more power cells. Still, he felt safer holding it. The shapes grew clearer as he moved closer. They were not machines or enemy scouts. They were animals, massive creatures, striped with blue and gray fur, their golden eyes dim with weakness. They looked like alien tigers, each larger than a horse. And between them knelt a figure, slender and trembling, her hands pressed desperately. Against one of the beasts. Daniel slowed his steps, stunned by the sight. She was no ordinary alien. Her skin glowed a deep blue, marked with faint patterns that shimmered like living paint under the sun. Her golden ornaments glinted even in the harsh desert light, and her hair, pale as sunlight itself, fell around. Her face, her ears were long and pointed, her eyes sharp and filled with sorrow. She was beautiful in a way Daniel could not put into words, but her beauty was shadowed by desperation. She whispered to the creatures in her language, her voice trembling, though Daniel could not understand a single word. Still, he understood enough. They were dying. The girl raised her head, noticing him at last. For a moment, her eyes hardened, and she looked ready to fight. But when she saw the rifle in his hand and then the water pouch at his belt, her expression changed. She rose quickly, her movements elegant even in her exhaustion, and took a step forward. The two beasts stirred weakly, baring their fangs, but lacked the strength to rise. Daniel stopped and held his hands up. His throat was dry, his tongue heavy, but he forced words out. "I'm not here to fight," he said, his voice cracked and broken. The girl tilted her head as if listening, but it was clear she did not know his words. Instead, she pointed at the pouch on his hip, her hand trembling. Then she dropped to her knees and pressed her forehead to the sand in front of him. It was not hard to understand. The beasts were dying of thirst, and she begged him to give them water. Daniel's chest tightened. He looked down at his pouch. There was barely enough for him to last another hour, maybe less. He could feel the dry ache in his throat, the pounding heat in his skull. Without water, he would not survive this desert. He had no ship, no allies, no way home. The logical choice was to keep every drop for himself. But as he looked at the alien girl kneeling in the sand, tears streaking down her glowing cheeks, and at the massive beasts gasping for breath, something inside him stirred. He thought of Earth, of his own dog he had once carried in his arms after it had collapsed from heat on a long summer day. He had given his dog his own water then, even though it left him faint and dizzy. His dog had survived. That memory burned brighter than the suns above. Slowly, Daniel crouched, unfastened the pouch, and held it out. The alien girl gasped, her hands trembling as she reached forward, but Daniel shook his head and pointed at the beasts. He uncapped the pouch himself and brought it to the lips of the nearest creature. The great beast opened its jaws weakly, its golden eyes flickering as Daniel poured a trickle of water. The sound of it drinking was desperate and raw. The girl cried out softly, a sound of relief and gratitude. She touched her chest, then bowed deeply to him, her golden jewelry clinking as she moved. Daniel ignored his own thirst and poured the rest of the water between the two beasts until the pouch was empty. He could feel his own body screaming for it, his mouth bone dry, but he clenched his teeth and endured. When the last drop was gone, the beasts raised their heads. Their eyes glowed brighter, their breathing steadied, and their muscles twitched with returning strength. The girl pressed her forehead to one of their massive shoulders, whispering words of love and thanks to them. Then she turned to Daniel and looked at him as if he were something more than just a man. Her eyes, glowing faintly like liquid silver, locked onto his. She spoke one word in her language, her voice trembling with awe. Daniel did not understand the word, but he knew its meaning. She had marked him in her heart. To her, he was no longer a stranger. He was the savior who had given up his life's last hope for hers. Daniel dropped the empty pouch to the sand. He swayed on his feet, the heat pressing down harder now that he had no water left. His vision blurred, but he did not fall. He stood tall, staring at the alien girl and her beasts. Somewhere deep in his chest he felt a strange calm. He had chosen, and the choice had been right. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, but something had changed in the silence. The beasts that had once lain weak and dying now rose to their feet, their massive bodies casting shadows over the sand. Their golden eyes, fierce yet grateful, watched Daniel with a strange intensity, as if they now recognized him as one of their own. The alien girl stood between them, her slender form glowing under the harsh sunlight, her long hair tangled by the wind. Her hands touched their flanks as though grounding herself in their strength. She turned her gaze back to Daniel, and in her eyes was something more powerful than words, an oath unspoken. Daniel swayed on his feet, feeling his throat burn like fire. His legs shook, and he knew his body could not endure much longer without water, yet he did not regret his choice. The girl approached him slowly, her movements graceful despite the exhaustion clinging to her. She raised her hand and touched his chest with trembling fingers, her skin cool against the heat of his body. She spoke softly in her language, her voice like a stream over stone. Though he could not understand her words, he felt the intent behind them: gratitude, promise, recognition. One of the beasts growled low, not in threat but as if summoning him. Daniel blinked, confused, until the girl gestured toward its back. She wanted him to ride. His breath caught. The creature stood taller than any horse he had ever seen, its body rippling with alien muscle. Its fangs gleamed, its claws cut into the sand, but its gaze softened when it met his. Daniel understood without water he could not walk far, but with them, perhaps he might survive. He hesitated only a moment before gripping the beast's thick fur and pulling himself onto its back. The creature shifted but did not resist. Girl climbed onto the second beast with practiced ease, her ornaments clinking like distant bells. With a soft word, she guided her companion forward, and Daniel's mount followed, carrying him across the burning desert. As they moved, the world seemed to change. The heat still scorched, but the beasts moved swiftly, their long strides devouring the dunes. The girl glanced at Daniel often, her silver eyes studying him, her lips parted as though she wished to speak. Finally, she placed her hand on her chest and spoke a word slowly, clearly. Her name. It was strange to his ears, a melody of sounds he could not reproduce, but he tried anyway. She smiled faintly when he did, and repeated it with a nod, teaching him. Then she pointed at him with a question in her gaze. "Daniel," he rasped, his voice rough from thirst. He touched his chest and repeated it. She echoed the sound carefully, her accent wrapping around his name like music. When she smiled again, it was brighter than the suns above. Hours passed. The beasts carried them across lands that seemed endless. Rocky ridges rose in the distance, and with them the promise of shade. Daniel's body weakened further, his mind drifting in and out of focus, but the girl never let her eyes leave him. When his head dropped forward, she reached across the gap between them and steadied him with her hand, her touch firm and protective. At last they reached the edge of a canyon. The rocks rose high, and cool shadows fell across the ground. Here, For the first time, Daniel felt relief from the burning suns. The beasts halted near a cluster of jagged stones, lowering themselves to the ground. The girl slipped down gracefully, then hurried to Daniel's side. He tried to dismount but nearly collapsed. She caught him with surprising strength, her arms supporting him as though he weighed nothing. She spoke again, urgent, her words quick as she gestured to the beasts. One of them padded forward and pressed its massive head against the rock wall. Its claws scraped, and a crack opened where water seeped out, clear and cold. Daniel stared, disbelief flooding him, a hidden spring. The girl guided him to it, her hands gentle as she lowered him. She filled her cupped hands and offered him the water. Daniel hesitated, only a second before drinking. The cool liquid slid down his throat, reviving him instantly. He gasped, shuddering as life returned to his body. She smiled with relief, her own shoulders trembling as though a great burden had lifted. The beasts drank deeply as well, their throats rumbling with satisfaction. When Daniel had enough strength to sit upright, the girl knelt before him and looked into his eyes. Slowly, she placed her palm over her heart, then over his. Her voice was steady, her words deliberate. Though he did not understand the language, he understood the meaning. She was binding something between them, marking him not as stranger, not as outsider, but as one chosen. Daniel felt a strange weight settle on his chest, not heavy but powerful, like the beginning of something he could not yet name. The beasts lay near, their golden eyes half closed, but their ears pricked at every sound, always aware. The desert wind whistled through the canyon, carrying with it the echo of war-distant explosions, faint screams. Daniel lifted his head, frowning. The war he thought he had escaped was still burning, even out here. The girl heard it too. Her expression shifted from relief to determination. She stood, her golden ornaments gleaming even in the shadows, and pointed toward the distant horizon. Then she placed her hand on his shoulder, firm and unyielding. Her message was clear. Their journey was not over. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of exhaustion, but when he opened them, he saw her standing tall, fierce and beautiful, her beasts flanking her like guardians of another world. And he knew then, whatever path lay ahead, he would not walk it alone. Night fell quickly in the canyon. The sun slipped behind the jagged rocks, leaving the land painted in shades of violet and silver. A thin wind swept through the cliffs, carrying the faint scent of dust and stone. Daniel sat near the hidden spring, his body finally steady after drinking deeply. His strength had returned, but only just enough. Across from him, the alien girl watched silently, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Her beasts lay close by, their massive bodies curled against each other, their breaths deep and steady. The silence between them was not empty. Though neither could understand the other's language, their eyes carried meaning. Daniel had saved her beasts. She had led him to water. Now something unspoken bound them. It was not trust built on words, it was survival, earned through sacrifice. A sudden noise broke the stillness. A low hum echoed through the canyon, unnatural and sharp against the quiet night. Daniel's head snapped up, his soldier's instincts instantly awake. The girl stiffened, her hand moving to the golden blade at her hip. The beasts raised their heads, ears pricked, golden eyes glowing like embers. The hum grew louder, becoming a vibration that shook the stones. Then came the light's sharp beams cutting through the dark sky. Daniel's stomach sank. He knew those lights, enemy drones. The war had found them. One beam swept across the canyon, painting the rocks in harsh white. Daniel grabbed the girl's wrist and pulled her down behind a boulder. The beasts crouched low, their muscles tensed like coiled springs. The girl's breathing was sharp, her eyes wide but steady. Daniel whispered, though he knew she could not understand, "Stay low, don't move." The drones descended. Metallic wings hummed as their searchlights swept the ground. Their red sensors blinked, scanning for heat, for movement, for life. Daniel's grip tightened on the useless rifle he still carried. He had no power cells left, no bullets, nothing but an empty shell of a weapon. His mind raced, calculating, searching for options. He was a soldier, trained for war, but never before had he felt so bare-handed. The girl suddenly touched his shoulder. When he looked at her, she pressed 2 fingers to her lips, then to the ground, as if telling him to trust her. She whistled. Softly, a sound like a bird's cry. The beasts rose silently, their paws barely stirring the sand. They melted into the shadows, their striped fur blending with the canyon stone. The drones hovered closer. Their scanners beeped as they swept over the spring. One stopped above Daniel's hiding place, its red light glowing brighter. His chest tightened. If it detected them, they were finished. The hum shifted, signaling a scan about to lock. Daniel tensed, ready to leap even if it meant certain death. Then came a blur of motion. One of the beasts launched from the shadows, faster than Daniel could follow. Its massive body slammed into their own with crushing force. Metal shrieked as claws ripped into steel, tearing it apart in a shower of sparks. The canyon filled with the beast's roar, a sound so powerful it made the stones vibrate. The other beast attacked the second drone before it could react. Its jaws closed around the machine, snapping wires like twigs. Sparks and fire lit the night. The drones screamed their mechanical death cries before falling silent, broken and torn. Daniel stared, stunned. The girl stood tall now, her blade drawn, her face fierce in the flickering light. Her beasts returned to her side, their fur bristling, their mouths dripping with oil and smoke instead of blood. She laid her hands on their heads, whispering thanks, calming them as their growls faded. Daniel exhaled slowly, his heart still pounding. For the first time in days, he felt something he had not dared to feel, hope, but he knew this was only the beginning. Where there were drones, soldiers would follow. The enemy did not stop until every target was destroyed. He looked at the girl and shook his head. "We can't stay here," he whispered. She did not know the words, but she understood. She nodded firmly, her silver eyes hard with determination. The group moved quickly, guided by the girl. The beasts led the way, their senses sharp in the dark. Daniel followed, every step heavy but steady. The girl glanced back often, making sure he was still behind her. At times, she slowed just enough to match his pace, though he could tell she could have moved faster. Hours passed, and the canyon gave way to wider land. The stars stretched above them, thousands of bright lights scattered across the sky. Daniel looked up, thinking of Earth, of the home he had not seen in years. He wondered if he would ever see it again. But then his gaze fell on the girl walking. Ahead, her figure glowing faintly in the starlight, her beasts flanking her like shadows of living power. And he thought maybe this was his place now. Just as the horizon began to lighten with the first touch of dawn, the girl stopped suddenly. She raised her hand, signaling silence. Daniel froze. The beasts crouched, their golden eyes burning in the dim light. Daniel strained his ears. At first, he heard nothing but the wind, then footsteps, dozens of them, armor clinking. Voices carried by the air. The enemy had arrived. The girl turned to Daniel, her face calm but fierce. She spoke a single word. Sharp and clear. A command. A promise. And Daniel, though he could not understand the language, nodded. He gripped his useless rifle tighter, ready to fight with whatever strength he had left. Because now it was no longer just about survival. It was about her. It was about the beasts. It was about the bond he had made when he gave up his final water. The first light of dawn revealed the enemy. Dark figures moved across the ridge above the canyon, their armor gleaming with cold metal edges. Their voices carried in a harsh tongue, filled with orders and threats. Daniel counted at least 20 soldiers, maybe more, their rifles glowing with charged energy cells. He knew they're type-efficient, ruthless, trained to kill without hesitation. The alien girl crouched low, her silver eyes narrowed. The beasts growled softly, their fur bristling, ready to strike. Daniel's heart pounded as he gripped the empty rifle in his hands. He knew it was useless, but he couldn't bring himself to drop it. A weapon, even dead, gave a man courage. The soldiers began to descend, their boots striking stone as they spread out, encircling the canyon floor. Daniel could feel the net closing around them. His mind raced. He was weak, still dehydrated despite the spring water, and he had nothing but instinct left. Yet something inside him refused to yield. He had given his last water for the beasts, and that choice had marked him. If he was to die now, he would not die running. The girl stood suddenly, her golden ornaments gleaming in the new light. She raised her blade high, and her voice rang out in her language, sharp and commanding. It was not a plea. It was a challenge. The soldiers froze, their rifles lifting to aim, but none fired. Daniel realized with shock that they recognized her. Whoever she was not just another alien girl. She carried authority. One of the soldiers stepped forward, his armor heavier, his stance more confident. A commander. He shouted down to her, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Daniel could not understand the words, but he could read the intent. Surrender, submission, slavery. The girl's chin lifted higher. She refused. The commander gestured, and 3 soldiers broke off, moving toward them with rifles aimed. The beasts roared in unison, a sound that made the canyon tremble. They launched forward before the soldiers could fire, their massive bodies moving like lightning. Claws raked through armor, jaws crushed weapons, and in seconds, the soldiers were torn apart. Oil and blood mingled on the sand. The commander snarled an order. Gunfire erupted, streaks of red energy slamming into the canyon floor. Daniel dove behind a rock, the heat of a shot scorching past his shoulder. The girl darted beside him, her blade flashing as she deflected a blast that would have struck his chest. Sparks flew, her movements impossibly fast, graceful yet deadly. Daniel's heart hammered. He had no weapon, no armor, but he had his mind. He scanned the battlefield. The soldiers were focused on the beasts and the girl. None were watching the ridge above. His soldiers' instincts took over. He grabbed a shard of broken drone metal from the ground sharp enough to cut, and began to climb the rocks at the canyon's edge. Every movement burned his muscles, but he forced himself upward. Below, the girl fought like fire itself, her blade slicing through rifles, her beasts tearing through enemies with primal fury. Yet the soldiers kept coming, their numbers overwhelming. If they were surrounded completely, there would be no escape. Daniel reached the ridge, his chest heaving. He crouched low, gripping the metal shard like a dagger. 2 soldiers stood there, aiming down at the fight below, their rifles flashing. Daniel crept forward, silent as shadow. With a sudden burst, he drove the shard into the first soldier's exposed joint. The alien screamed, collapsing as Daniel ripped the weapon from his grip. Before the second could react, Daniel swung the rifle like a club, smashing it across the soldier's helmet. The enemy crumpled, motionless. Now Daniel had a weapon. He lifted the alien rifle, feeling its strange weight. His hands shook, but training guided him. He aimed down into the canyon and fired. The shot blazed through the air, striking the soldier square in the chest. The alien fell, smoking. The girl's head snapped up at the sound. When her eyes met Daniel's, her face changed relief, pride, and something deeper. She shouted a word, sharp and fierce, pointing at him. Her beasts roared in answer. For the first time, they were fighting not as strangers, but as one force. Daniel fired again, his shots more steady now. The rifle hummed with deadly energy as he cut down soldier after soldier. The girl surged forward, her blade flashing, driving fear into the enemies who dared face her. The beasts moved like thunder, unstoppable and wild. The commander roared. In anger, he aimed his heavy rifle at the girl and fired a burst of searing energy. She twisted, the blast grazing her arm. She stumbled, her blade dropping for a heartbeat. Daniel's stomach clenched. Without thinking, he hurled himself from the ridge, landing hard in the sand between her and the commander's next shot. The energy bolt slammed into his borrowed rifle, ripping it from his hands, but his body shielded hers. Pain seared through him, his chest burning. He dropped to one knee, gasping, his vision swimming. The girl cried out, catching him before he fell. Her silver eyes burned with fury, not fear. She rose, lifting her blade again, her voice a storm as she shouted a command. Beasts answered. With a roar that split the air, they charged the commander. He fired wildly, but claws and fangs tore through his armor, dragging him to the ground. The canyon shook with the sound of his scream before silence swallowed him. The battle was over. The last soldiers fled, their courage broken. The girl fell to her knees beside Daniel, her hands pressing against his chest where the burn mark glowed. Tears streamed down her face, falling onto his skin like silver rain. She whispered his name, Daniel, again and again, her voice trembling but strong. Daniel's vision blurred, but he managed a faint smile. Still alive, he rasped. His body shook, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. The beasts circled them protectively, their golden eyes fierce, their bodies scarred but standing tall. The girl looked at him, her expression no longer just gratitude. It was something stronger, something unshakable. He had not only saved her beasts, he had fought beside her, bled beside her. And now in her eyes, he was no longer just a savior. He was something greater. The canyon lay quiet after the battle, littered with broken armor and smoking rifles. The bodies of the fallen soldiers stained the sand, their defeat echoing in silence. The beasts paced in slow circles, their golden eyes glowing faintly in the dim morning light. They sniffed the air, making sure no enemies remained. Their deep growls faded into rumbling purrs when they finally settled near the alien girl, and Daniel lay against the rocks, his chest burning where the commander's shot had struck. Every breath came ragged, like fire clawing through his lungs. His hands trembled, his strength slipping away again. He had fought, he had killed, and he had survived, but now his body threatened to betray him. The alien girl knelt at his side, her long hair falling around his face like a veil of pale gold. Her hands pressed against the scorched mark on his chest, her fingers glowing faintly as though trying to push life back into him. She whispered his name over and over, her voice sharp with determination. Daniel tried to speak, but only a hoarse sound escaped his lips. He wanted to tell her he was fine. He wanted to tell her not to cry. But the truth pressed against him. Without help, he would not last long. He had no medical supplies, no way to heal such a wound. The girl seemed to realize this. Her silver eyes hardened, no longer just sorrowful but resolute. She reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out a small vial. Inside glowed a liquid that shimmered like starlight. She held it tightly, her lips moving in words Daniel could not understand. Her beasts shifted uneasily, watching with alert eyes as if they too knew the danger of what she held. Daniel's gaze fixed on the vial. He recognized desperation when he saw it. Whatever was inside was not meant for humans. He shook his head faintly, whispering through his dry lips, "No, might kill me." The girl ignored him. She pressed her forehead to his, her eyes closing, and whispered something softly. It was not a command. It was a plea. Then, with steady hands, she uncorked the vial and tilted it toward his lips. Daniel hesitated only a moment. He remembered the desert, his final water given to her beasts, and how she had chosen to save him afterward. If this was her way of returning that gift, How could he refuse? With a faint nod, he parted his lips, and the shimmering liquid touched his tongue. The taste was unlike anything he had ever known. Cold, sharp, and sweet all at once, like drinking light itself. It slid down his throat, filling his chest with a burning that turned quickly into warmth. His vision blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again. His heart pounded wildly, his body trembling as though it did not know whether to break or to heal. Girl held him tightly, her arms around his shoulders, whispering prayers into his ear. The beasts pressed closer, their heavy bodies forming a wall around them, their rumbling growls a warning to the universe itself not to interfere. Minutes stretched into eternity. Daniel gasped, clutching at the girl's arm. His chest burned. Hotter, then cooled suddenly, leaving him shivering. Slowly, painfully, he realized he could breathe more easily. The fire in his lungs faded. The burn mark across his chest dimmed from angry red to faint scars. He opened his eyes. The girl's face hovered over his, her silver eyes wide with worry. When she saw his chest rise more smoothly, her lips parted and she let out a breath that trembled. Her tears fell freely, landing on his cheek like drops of shining crystal. She touched his face, speaking his name again, softer this time. Daniel swallowed, his voice raw but steady. Still here. The girl smiled then, a smile that broke like dawn across the shadows. She pressed her forehead to his once more, her ornaments chiming softly. Daniel felt strength returning to his limbs, though he knew it was not just human strength anymore. Something in him had changed. The alien liquid still flowed in his veins, and he could feel its strange power humming faintly under his skin. Sat up slowly, supported by her. The beasts growled low, but this time it was not warning, it was approval. They seemed to sense the change as well. Daniel looked at them, and for the first time, he felt as though he could almost understand their intent, not with words but with instinct. The girl helped him to his feet, though she never released his arm. She pointed to the horizon where smoke rose in the distance, more soldiers. The war was spreading even here. Her silver eyes met his, filled with resolve. She had saved him, but not for him alone. She needed him. Daniel nodded, tightening his grip on the alien rifle he had taken. He felt the faint pulse of energy in his chest, steady and alive. He was no longer just a human survivor. He was something more now, something forged in fire, water, and sacrifice. The group began to move again, leaving the canyon behind. The beasts strode with renewed vigor, their golden eyes scanning the skies. The girl walked beside Daniel, her hand brushing against his, as though anchoring herself to his presence. As they climbed a rocky path leading toward the mountains, Daniel turned his head to study her. She looked straight ahead, her jaw set, her beauty fierce and untouchable. Yet when she caught his gaze, her eyes softened. She said his name again, quietly, and for the first time, it did not sound foreign on her tongue. Daniel breathed deeply, his chest no longer burning but humming with strange energy. He had given his last water, and she had given him life in return. Now as dawn spread across the desert, he understood something new. They were no longer two strangers surviving by chance. They were bound by choices, by sacrifice, by something deeper than either had planned. And whatever waited ahead, enemy soldiers, endless deserts, or death itself, they would face it together. The mountains rose like jagged teeth against the morning sky. Daniel, the alien girl, and her two beasts climbed steadily, their shadows stretching long across the stone. The world felt quieter here, though smoke on the horizon reminded them that war still burned behind them. Every step forward felt heavy with choice, yet Daniel no longer felt like a man waiting to die. The alien liquid coursed faintly through him, giving him strength where there should have been weakness. His body no longer shook with exhaustion, his spirit carried him onward. The girl walked close beside him, her silver eyes watching him often. Her beasts flanked them both, golden eyes sharp, their bodies still scarred from battle yet unbowed. They were more than animals to her. Daniel understood that now. They were family. And somehow, after he gave them his final water, he had been accepted into that family. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking a valley. Below, a village shimmered in the distance, its domed roofs carved from stone, its walls glinting with faint energy barriers. The girl pointed to it, her eyes filled with hope. This was her home, or what remained of it. But before relief could settle in, the sharp crack of gunfire split the air. Daniel's heart tightened. Enemy banners snapped. In the valley wind, soldiers filled the outskirts of the village, their machines pounding at the walls, their rifles blazing. The people inside her people were trapped. The girl froze, her face pale with horror. Her hands trembled as she clutched her golden blade. Daniel saw it in her eyes. Her family, her people, were about to be slaughtered. She turned to him, desperation and fury burning in her gaze. She didn't need words. He understood. Daniel looked at the beasts. They growled low, ears flattened, their massive bodies ready to strike. He looked at the girl, her beauty hard with resolve, her tears threatening but held back. He thought of his choice in the desert, of the last water he had given. That choice had led here, to this moment. He tightened his grip on the alien rifle. "Then we fight," he said simply. The girl's eyes widened, then softened. She pressed her hand over his heart, where her potion had healed him, and whispered his name, Daniel, like a vow. Then she raised her blade high, her ornaments shining in the sun. The beasts roared, their cries rolling like thunder through the valley. Together, they descended. The battle that followed was chaos and fire. Soldiers turned as the beasts crashed into their lines, claws ripping through metal, fangs tearing through armor. The girl moved with grace and fury, her blade flashing arcs of gold as she struck down enemy after enemy. Daniel fought beside her, his aim steady, the alien rifle blazing with deadly light. Each shot he fired burned through soldiers, his body moving faster, stronger than it ever had before. The alien liquid within him sang, guiding his reflexes, sharpening his instincts. The defenders inside the village saw them and rallied. The gates opened, and her people surged forward, shouting war cries, wielding blades and rifles of their own. For the first time, the tide shifted, yet the enemy commander appeared again, not the one from the canyon, but another, taller, stronger, armored in black steel. His weapon was massive, glowing with unstable power. He cut through the defenders. With brutal swings, his voice booming commands. Daniel knew at once, this was the true threat. The girl saw it too. She raised her blade and charged. The commander's weapon struck, and sparks exploded as her blade barely deflected the blow. The force sent her sprawling. She cried out, her weapon tumbling from her hand. The commander aimed his weapon at her chest. Daniel didn't think. He ran. His body moved faster than thought, faster than fear. He slammed into the commander, driving his shoulder into the alien's chest. They both crashed to the ground, the commander's weapon discharging into the dirt with a blinding flash. Daniel scrambled, grabbing the metal shard he still carried from before. He plunged it into the commander's exposed neck joint. The alien screamed, thrashing, but Daniel held on with desperate strength. With a final shove, he drove the shard deep, and the commander fell silent. Daniel collapsed beside him, gasping, his body shaking. The alien rifle clattered from his hand. The girl was suddenly there, her arms around him, her silver eyes wide with terror and relief. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering words he could not understand, but felt deep in his chest. Around them, the battle ended. The enemy soldiers broke and fled, their machines collapsing as the defenders destroyed them. The beasts stood tall over the field, their fur bloodied, but their roars triumphant. The village lived. Her people lived. The girl helped Daniel to his feet, her arm firm around his shoulders. The villagers gathered, bowing their heads to her. Their queen, their leader. Daniel finally understood who she was. She was no ordinary girl wandering the desert. She was royalty, the heart of her people, the one they would die to protect. And yet, when she stood tall before them, her hand never left his. The people looked at Daniel with awe, whispering words he could not know but could guess. Human, savior, warrior. The girl lifted his hand high, her voice ringing across the valley. His name echoed from her lips, carried by hundreds of voices. Daniel. He stood there, his chest scarred, his body altered by alien liquid, his soul bound by the choice he had made with one final pouch of water. He had not saved them with weapons. Alone. He had saved them with sacrifice, with humanity, with the stubborn will to give when he had nothing left. The girl looked at him, her silver eyes bright with pride and something deeper. In that moment, Daniel realized the truth. He had come to this desert alone, abandoned and nearly dead. Now he was not alone. He was part of something greater, her beasts, her people. The desert wind blew, carrying away the smoke of war. And Daniel, once a dying soldier, stood reborn as the man who had given his last water and won more than survival. He had won a place in a world that would never forget him.